You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am the man, Koku. I'm your host tonight, as always, and we're going to do what we usually do, right about this time. I want to thank everyone who's listening to this episode. Before I go on any further, I want to remind you guys that this show is a part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio. There are other shows I think you guys should be tuning into on the network in addition to this show.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Also, check out the Queen's Council Podcast, another one of the shows here on KWAZ Radio. All right, with that said, we're reading another John Henrik CLARKE paper. Reading another John Henrik CLARKE paper. And before I get into the paper, I just want to comment on the last episode that we did, the last live stream, the Saturday night Shoot the Breeze episode, which was really good. But what was even in some ways better than the episode was the conversation that was had in the Discord afterwards. And I'm going to do more of that in the future, where we just have some Discord only conversations. But in the Discord, I mean, we discussed a lot of topics that we've talked about in the past in terms of, starting some writing teams. Let's put out some scripts, short stories, what have you, that uplifts and energizes and brings up the ego and self-determination of our people. So we started that, right? And for those of you who were in that conversation, there, as promised on Sunday, I posted the prompt. Daily Affirmations by Pauline came in, swooped in, and wrote 2 paragraphs already. I like the start of it. I'm going to add something in the next day or so. I hope the rest of you add to it as well. We can't talk about something and then not be about what we talk about. All right, so you guys check that out on the Discord. If you're not on the Discord and you're hearing this, in the chat and in the description of this episode, you'll see the link to join the Discord. So by all means, make sure you join the Discord. Our numbers in the Discord is growing, and eventually here, I'm gonna have to start vetting the people who are on the Discord. I saw someone join the Discord. I reached out to them, no response. That sends up red flags. We don't want to be infiltrated by those who don't want to see the kind of work that we're doing being done. And so soon enough, folks are gonna have to verify who they are on the Discord. Is there anything else I'm missing out? I think I covered it. One last thing. In our conversation of the Discord, I have my work cut out to do. There's a template I'm going to be sending out between now and Friday that breaks down a lot of these stories that I've read on the show before We're going to start breaking them down into different sections. You know, I talked about it on the Discord. I won't talk about it more here, but that's coming next. Expect that in a few days. Again, join the Discord if you'd like to know what a black man is talking about. All right. Today's episode, John Henrik CLARKE, the impact of the African on the new world, a reappraisal. Right? And this probably won't be a long show tonight, especially if the chat's not going. This won't be a long show tonight, but it starts the pre-Columbian presence of the Africans in what is called the New World has long been a subject for speculation. Any honest examination of the old and the new evidence relating to this subject will put all speculation to rest. While this paper deals mainly with the second impact of Africans on the Western Hemisphere, it is important that we look at least briefly, at this first impact in the light of the old and the new evidence. The formal investigation into this subject started in 1920 with the publication of Professor Leo Weiner's massive 3-volume work, Africa and the Discovery of America. In the first volume of this work, Professor Weiner shows that American archaeology on both the Africans and the Indians is built on sand and suppositions, and the chronology of culture development for both of these people is totally out of order. He also shows that the Africans have had a far greater influence on American civilization than has heretofore been suspected. The second volume of this work is a study of African religions and their influence on the culture of this hemisphere. All right? Something worth looking at. His documents tend to prove to an extraordinary extent that the Indian medicine man owes his evolution to the African medicine. Explaining the diaries of Christopher Columbus, Professor Weiner calls attention to the fact that this European explorer admits that he found a dark-skinned people in the Caribbean islands trading with the Indians. Who were these dark-skinned people? Columbus infers that they were people from the coast of Guinea, which is West Africa. In 1936, College E. Woodson published his book, The African Background Outlined. This book had additional information on the pre-Columbian presence of the Africans in what is called the New World. Dr. Woodson's observations are that several authorities during this time believed that Africans discovered America long before the Europeans had any such dreams, for the Occident was all but in a state of savagery until awakened by contact with the more enlightened Orient during the Crusades. The early European explorers on the Isthmus of Darien found there in caves skulls which were identified as African. Students of ethnology observed also that the religion of the North and South American Indians is very much like that of the Africans. Professor Leo Weiner had previously made the same observation. In the language of the Indians, moreover, are discovered certain words which appeared originally in the language of the Africans, such as canoe, tobacco, and bukra. These, however, must not be confused with African words like goober, yam, banjo, and voodoo, which were later brought from Africa to America. You know, I had a conversation with Erzulism earlier today, and Erzulism was telling me about this work, and I briefly looked it up. Was telling me about this work where there's a bunch of terms in Nigeria that you find in Asia, I think particularly Japan. There's a bunch of words that you can find in Nigeria that you also find in Japan. In fact, let me look it up real quick. Let me look it up real quick. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it. In fact, some have questioned if there's a mysterious ancient link between Nigerians and the Japanese. For example, ancient Tokyo was called Edo, which is the name of a tribe in Nigeria. There's the word Naka, which is a Japanese name, and Odanaka, which is an Igbo name. Owari, which is a Japanese town, Owerri, which is an Igbo town, right? Ikeda, Japanese name. Ikeria, Igbo name, you know, and there's a few more. Some have indirect similarities, some have direct similarities, you know, so there's something to be said for that. NYC Beauties is in the room tonight, saying greetings, family. Greetings to you too. Well, NYC Beauty says Oni is a word you find in Japan and Nigeria, right? So, you know, in reading this paper here and in reading that little part of the previous paragraph, right? In the language of the Indians, moreover, I discovered certain words which appeared originally in the language of the Africans, right? So who was the original man? The cultural and philological evidence to support the claim that Africans on the West Coast rose to such a high level of culture and maritime skill is more apparent with each new book on the subject. The matter is out of the realm of pure speculation. It can now be said with a high degree of certainty that Africans braved the roaring waters of the high seas and established relationships with the Indians of the Americas well over 1,000 years ago. In the article, African Explorers of the New World by Harold G. Lawrence, this statement is made, quote, "We can now positively state that the Mandingos of the Mali and Songhai empires, and possibly other Africans, crossed the Atlantic to carry on trade with the Western Hemisphere Indians, further succeeded in establishing colonies throughout the Americas. During the 13th century, Mali, the early of these two great empires, building on the ruins of ancient Ghana, rose to become one of the leading nations of the world." Professor Lawrence elaborates on these early African voyages to the West in the following statement, quote, "It is more important to note here that voyages across the Atlantic were resumed or continued during the reign of Askia. Proof of this is evidenced by the fact that Columbus was informed by some men when he stopped at one of the Cape Verde Islands off the coast of Africa that Negroes had been known to set out into the Atlantic from the Guinea coast in canoes loaded with merchandise and steering towards the west. The same Christopher Columbus was further informed by the Indians of Hispaniola when he arrived in the West Indies that they had been able to obtain gold from black men who had come from across the sea from the south and southeast. The dates of these accounts coincide precisely with the time that Askia the Great held sway over Songhai." How many of you are familiar with Askia the Great? How many of you are familiar with Askia the Great? NYC Sports Archives is here saying, "Hello everyone, abundance to all." Yes, abundance to everyone. Right. It must also be added that Amerigo Vespucci, on his voyage to the Americas, witnessed these same black men out in the Atlantic returning to Africa. 15th and 16th century Spanish explorers and early American art, legends, and burials provide the principal sources of information on what happened to these African seamen after their arrival in the Americas. In effect, the Spanish conquistadors found dispersed all over the New World small tribes who were from the very first considered Negroes. The largest Negro colony appears to have been a permanent settlement at Darien, where Balboa saw them in 1513. American Indian legends abound with accounts of black men who came to them from far-off lands. Aside from the report that Columbus obtained at Hispaniola, a notable tale is recorded in the Peruvian traditions. They inform us of how black men coming from the east had been able to penetrate the Andes Mountains. Furthermore, Indian traditions of Mexico and Central America indicate that Negroes were among the first occupants of that territory. Some Indians there yet claim descent from these same blacks. You know, it's a hell of a thing to be conquered. And it's a hell of a thing to be conquered, number one. Because what we've seen from history is that the conquerors will justify you being conquered. They will edit, erase, demolish your history, right? Just to uphold the reasons why they conquered you. And in my conversation with Urzulism early today, for those of you who don't know who Urzulism is, I interviewed him on the show a couple years back when he had his directorial debut, The Raging Elephant film. So go back and check that out if you're not familiar with whom I speak of. But we talked about that earlier today, how we've lost so much ground. And, you know, I realized in that conversation why there's a lot of black folks who are just docile. I think a lot of black folks, through one way or the other, realize that we have lost so much ground and that the oppressor, the conqueror, is still planning on a daily basis how to keep us down and how to you know, make us lose even more ground to them. And I've come to this feeling within my spirit that a lot of our people realize this and have just checked out. They've just given up. They might not articulate it the way I did, but I realize a lot of folks have just checked out because the amount of effort is going to take, the amount of unity, the amount of putting certain aspects of yourself on the back burner, right? A lot of folks aren't really willing nor ready to do that to themselves, which is it's such a shame to think that that might be our reality. The reality of it is, if we don't push back today, it's going to be worse for our people 100 years from now. And frankly, and I don't say this, I'm not trying to be a shock jock, I'm not trying to use scare tactics, I'm just being real. If we're not careful, in 100 years from now, when most of us will be dead and gone, who are listening to this broadcast, in 100 years, if we're not careful, our people will be enslaved again. Think about it. To continue, in the magazine West Africa, Saturday, June 7, 1969, there is an article by Basil Davidson with the title Africans Before Columbus. In this article, we are told that Columbus and other early European arrivals in the Americas came back with quite a bit of evidence, suggestive but inconclusive, that black people from Africa had already reached those shores. Various writers have pointed from time to time over the past 20 years, and more to the likely West African for the last 20 years and more, to the likely West African origins of the black explorers, notable of that tribe of Almamis, who was said to have settled in Honduras. Almamis. You guys ever heard of the Almamis before? Yeah, that's I'm not sure why that hit me so hard. Almamis. In the chat room, NYC Sports Archives is here. Like I said, wishing abundance to everyone. Kevin Care42 says Guinea gold was found in Mexico. Black Excellence is here saying greetings. Black Excellence also says Mansa Musa's brother went to the Americas. Kevin Care42 says I will fight to my last breath for my people. That's what we got to do. We can't give up. All right. KW7 says the idea that there was a large population of African people in the Americas has not been proven. Yeah, you know, and again, this is one of those big debates, and it's a part of the ADOS FBA discussions. A lot of people say that Sheikh Anta Diop claimed, you know, that there was large populations of African people in the Americas. But from what I've read, Sheikh Anta Diop didn't really claim that, but he does contend, like Dr. John Henrik CLARKE does. He does contend that there was an arrival of black folks from the continent. Not that they stayed here, but they had traveled and visited the Americas. KW7 says Van Sertima's they came before Columbus has been debunked. Who debunked Van Sertima's they came before Columbus? Who debunked that? I'd like to read about that. Who debunked that? If that's something I could talk about on the show, I'll talk about it as well. KW7, let me know who debunked that. To continue, 2 books, Introduction to African Civilization by John G. Jackson and The Art of Terracotta Pottery in Pre-Columbian Central and South America by Alexander von Woof, contain the last and probably the most convincing evidence of the pre-Columbian presence of Africans in the New World. The book by von Wuthenau is heavily illustrated. His visual evidence leaves no room for debate. In order to understand the magnitude of the second African impact on the Americas, it is necessary that we look 2 ways, both at Europe and at Africa. The genesis of Africa's troubled years is in both places. So that takes us to another section of the paper. Early in the 15th century, Europe began to recover from the wounds of the Middle Ages and the Crusades. European skill in shipbuilding had improved, and in search of a food supply for their hungry populations and for new worlds to conquer, Europeans began to venture beyond their shores. There are many reasons why the Europeans had not embarked upon worldwide exploration before this time. Their ships were small and unsafe for long sea journeys. Oars were sometimes used to propel these ships, and the outcome of all voyages depended largely on the wind. There were no good maps or instruments to guide sailors through unknown waters. At that time, most Europeans were ignorant about the shape of the world. Some of them thought it was flat. The Portuguese set out to disprove this, and about the middle of the 15th century, they began trading with the peoples along the west coast of Africa, to which they gave the name Guinea, after the Sudanic Empire of Ghana. At first, they traded mainly in gold, but before long, they began to take slaves also. Social and political unrest began to develop among some of the nations of West Africa at the time Europe was regaining its strength and a degree of unity. First Europeans who visited the west coast of Africa did not have to fight their way in. They came as guests and were treated as guests. Later, they decided to stay as conquerors and slave traders. In order to gain a position strong enough to attain these ambitions, they began to take sides in African family disputes. very often supplying the family or tribe they favor with arms and using their favorites as slave catchers. That's interesting. That's interesting right there. A number of African nations went into the slave trade in order to buy guns and other European manufactured items. Others were forced to capture slaves or become slaves. The Europeans did not come to Africa initially to find slaves. That's the thing. I always tell people that some people aren't criminal, to be honest. Some people just saw a criminal opportunity, or saw an opportunity and it became criminal, right? For example, if you walk through, you know, a quote-unquote bad neighborhood and you have some money in your hand or something like that, some folks who witness you walking through the neighborhood, they themselves wouldn't usually take anything from anyone. But if you look like a dummy and a punk, they may snatch some money out your hand, right? So I say that to say, I get where Dr. Clarke is going with this, right? These folks didn't come to find slaves, but they did find people slipping. They found folks slipping, our folks slipping. That doesn't justify what they did, but they found our folks slipping. And the lesson, the moral of that story is, don't be out here slipping. Especially in front of strangers. For years, they had been hearing stories about the great riches of Africa. At the Battle of Ceuta against the Muslims in 1416, Prince Henry the Navigator, as he later became known, who was Prince Henry of Portugal, heard about the prosperity of Timbuktu and the wealth of the great states along the west coast of Africa. He also heard stories about a great African Christian king named Prester John. Before the end of the 15th century, the Portuguese sailors had come to know the general shape of the continent of Africa. They traded regularly with African countries from 1771 on. Forts were built along the coast of West Africa. The most famous of these forts still in existence is Elmina Castle, in what is now Ghana. This fort was started in 1482 by a Portuguese captain, Don Diego de Azambuja. Because of the large profits gained by the Portuguese in their trading with this country, they called it the Gold Coast. During the latter half of the 15th century, European nationalism was reflected in the expansion of trade in both slaves and manufactured goods. The marriage of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand gave Europe the unity to drive out the Moors. Both Spain and Portugal were becoming powerful Mediterranean nations, right? Right. KW Dawn posted the article, so if you guys are listening to this in playback, you can click the link he posted in the chat and it'll take you to oh, this is Dwayne Wong, huh? Also known as Omawali. Okay, so okay, I'll have to read it. I'll have to read it for sure. And go through it. Again, maybe it's something I read on air. Omawali is mostly solid, but some stuff I've seen from him, you know, it's kind of questionable. Like if you saw his role in the Abrahamic religions discussion, you know, I'll leave it there. In 1488, Bartholomew Diaz had sailed around the southern tips of Africa. Well, 10 years later, another Portuguese sailor, Vasco da Gama, sailed past the point reached by Diaz. With the help of an Arab pilot, Vasco da Gama reached India in 1498. For Europe, the door of the vast world of Asia was open. story of the African slave trade is essentially the story of the consequences of the second rise of Europe. In the years between the passing of the Roman Empire in the 8th century and the partial unification of Europe through the framework of the Catholic Church in the 15th century, Europeans were engaged mainly in internal matters. See, I like that inclusion right there, right? When you talk about Abrahamic religions, what folks don't talk about is the unifying nature, right, to some degree, that Abrahamic religion, particularly Catholicism, had for Europe becoming a power. So when folks tell you that it's imperialistic, that these religions are imperialistic, it's not a lie. A big part of why they were able to unite and come into power was under this one faith, right? Now later on, there was splintering into the Anglican Church and Protestantism and all that kind of stuff, but understand the role that the Catholic Church played, right? With the opening of the New World and the expulsion of the Moors from Spain during the latter part of the 15th century, the Europeans started to expand beyond their homeland into the broader world. They were searching for new markets, new materials, new manpower, and new land to exploit. Right? That's what they were doing. And then they caught Africans slipping. The African slave trade was created to accommodate this expansion. Right? KW7 says he doesn't think Africans will be enslaved again. I think ovens will be built this time. He thinks ovens will be built this time. The only reason, a big part of the reason why I feel like we will go back into that, if we don't really do work now, is because this capitalistic society likes its labor, likes its free labor. And I mean, it just sounds bad, it feels bad to say, but you know, as it was before, it is now, and probably will be in the future, we would be the people who can make it happen for them. I watched this documentary. I think Kevin Kerr might have posted it. It's either him or General Abzu, Derico Cooper Photography. They were talking about the meth epidemic in Montana. Let me tell you something. You look at these folks, they're poor folks, right? They're poor whites can't do no work. Real friggin' talk, they cannot do no work. You know, so that's the only reason why I think for labor. Now, if they're able to create AI and robots and all that kind of stuff that could more or just as efficiently do the work, then we're toast, right? The basis for the European Industrial Revolution had already been established. They had already created an embryo technology, including the gun. The years that followed, they also used other advantages, mainly a large fleet of ships and rabble soldiers and sailors with no sentimental attachment to non-European people, take over most of the world. In so doing, they destroyed a large number of nations and civilizations that were older than any in Europe. The main problem with the African in dealing with the European during this early period was his tragic naivete. He had never dealt extensively with this kind of people. Came out of a society where nature was kind. Nature furnished him enough food, enough land, enough of the basic things he needed to live a pretty good life. These old African societies were governed by honor and obligation. Land could neither be bought nor sold. There were no fights over the ownership of land. The land belonged to everyone. It's wild to me, you know, how these Europeans clamor for land. And unfortunately, in present day, we have to clamor for land too, because land equals freedom. Land equals freedom. And so they forced us to become these folks who now have to, argue over land ownership, who now have to fight for land. All right? I mean, you want land, of course, right? Because, again, land is freedom. Land is how you feed yourself and take care of your people. But, our people, like the writing just said, our people understood that, we, after a certain amount of time, we're gone from here. And it's those who we leave behind, that's who's going to work that land and live on the land. What's this thing about ownership of land that we can't take it with us, right? But that's where we are now. To continue. Yeah, you know what? Let me take a quick station ID break here. I'll be back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Also check out the Queen's Council podcast on KWAZ Radio. Tiffany Johnson, I don't think I've seen you here before. Welcome. If this is your first time, make sure to click subscribe, grab the like button, and also click the bell to be notified of when I'm on again live or when I upload new content. Tiffany Johnson's in the chat room says, we are forced to be capitalists. Yeah, we are forced to be a part of the machine. One thing I would warn against, though, is we're not forced to put profits over people. And like I think it was Onita say from the pro-black perspective some time ago, fairly recently, said something in the chat during a live stream. He said, we got to find another term. Because when you say capitalist, then we're put in the same bucket with these Europeans who practice this savage thing called capitalism. Right? But there's nothing wrong with making profits. The problem is when you put profits over the people. Right? So yeah, but we, because of proximity, etc., we're forced to participate in capitalism. And if we want to do anything for ourselves, we're forced to practice some form of capitalism to help get ourselves and our people, our family, out of the muck, so to speak. Thanks for the comment, Tiffany Johnson. Also, Tiffany, there's the Discord link in the chat. If you're not on the Discord, please do join, or at least please consider joining. I'm building a sisters corner, and I have a couple of sisters in there together, and I'm putting a sister in charge of that corner, so you guys can discuss, you can build, you can reason, you can work on projects. I'd like to see our sisters actually communing, because from what I understand, it's tough for sisters to find other sisters to build with. So I have, I'm trying to build an opportunity for like-minded sisters to come together, talk it out, work it out, and get stuff done from their perspective. To continue, the European coming from a society where nature was rather stingy, and where he had to compete with his brother for his breakfast, his land, and his woman, had acquired a competitive nature that the African could not deal with. In order to justify the destruction of these African societies, a monster that still haunts our lives was created. This monster was racism. The slave trade and the colonial system that followed are the parents of this catastrophe. The Europeans, mainly the Portuguese, who came to the west coast of Africa in the 15th century, were not at first looking for slaves. The search for gold and other treasures lured them to Africa. They did not have to fight their way into the continent. They came as guests and were treated as guests. Then they grew strong, decided to be conquerors, and turned on their hosts. In the meantime, Portugal and Spain, having broken part of the Moorish power in the Mediterranean, began to vie for spheres of influence. Someone remind me, how did the Portuguese and Spanish finally beat the Moors? I'm drawing a blank right now. How did they finally beat the Moors? As good Catholic nations, they went to the Pope to settle a dispute. The Pope told them, in essence, you take the east and you take the west. Spain began to gravitate toward the west, Portugal toward the east. Using maps made by Jews who dealt in gold in northern and western Africa, the Portuguese prince called Henry the Navigator, who incidentally never went to sea, began to send Portuguese expeditions down the coast of West Africa, first for trade, then to establish Portuguese holdings in that area. When the Moors were expelled from Spain, they returned to Morocco, where the Emperor El Mansur arranged with them to invade Equatorial Africa, the old empire of Songhai. This invasion broke up the structure of the last great empire in Western Africa. The chaos that followed set up Africa for the future European slave trade. So that raises the question. You will hear a lot of our folks bigging up the Moors. Right? Were the Moors black folks, a mix of black and Arabs? Who were the Moors then? Right? Because listen to what we're reading about the Moors right now. Right? Return to Morocco. The emperor, who was an Arab name, arranged them to invade Equatorial Africa. Who then are the Moors? Slave trade prospered and Africans continued to be poured into the New World. Figures on the subject vary, but it has been estimated that during the years of the African slave trade, Africa lost from 60 to 100 million people. This was the greatest single crime ever committed against a people in world history. It was also the most tragic act of protracted genocide. The first Africans who came to the New World were not in bondage, contrary to popular belief. Africans participated in some of the early expeditions, mainly with Spanish explorers. The best known of these African explorers was Estevanico, sometimes known as Little Stephen, who accompanied the De Vaca expedition during 6 years of wandering from Florida to Mexico. The remarkable thing about Estevanico, who came to America in 1527, is that he was a remarkable linguist. He learned the language of the Indians in a matter of weeks. Because of his knowledge of herbs and medicines, he was accepted as a deity by some Indian tribes. 1539, Estevanico set out from Mexico in a party with Fray Marcos de Niza in search of the fabulous 7 cities of Cibola. When most of the expedition, including Fray Marcos, became ill, Estevanico went on alone and opened up what is now known as New Mexico and Arizona. New Mexico and Arizona. In chat room, KW Don 7 says the mouse cannot build mouse wealth in the confines of a snake pit. The whole system has to be torn down in order for Africans to achieve true sovereignty. You know, I have some thoughts on that. By the way, if you're here listening to the show, make sure to hit the like button. I'm looking at the number of viewers and the number of likes, and they just don't equal. Make sure to hit the like button. That like button, as simple as that is, takes you a second or less to hit it. It actually helps this small channel grow. So make sure to hit the like button, and I appreciate you being here, but also hit the like button as well. That statement by KW Don 7, I get where he's coming from. I think I'm going to really dwell on that in a future conversation. I'll just say this. Their system has taken such root, such deep roots. You're not bringing that down anytime soon. And if that has to go down before you could become yourself, your own people, self-determined, then we're in a bad predicament. I personally believe that we can maneuver to a certain extent through the system, and then we have to build our own system. A system that can sustain us all. But I don't disagree with what KW Don's saying in the chat room. I think of it a little bit differently, that's all. To continue, a number of historians have stated that Pedro Nino, one of the pilots of the command ship of Christopher Columbus, was an African. In the discovery of the Pacific in 1513, Balboa carried 30 Africans who helped to clear the road across the isthmus between the two oceans. In the conquest of Mexico, Cortez was accompanied by a number of Africans. Incidentally, one was a pioneer of wheat farming in the New World. In the exploration of Guatemala, Chile, Peru, and Venezuela, Africans arrived nearly 100 years before they reappeared as slaves in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. Thus, Africans were major contributors to the making of the New World, and they did not come culturally empty-handed. Many of the Africans brought to the New World such skills as ironwork, leatherwork, and carpentry. I will say this too. Remember, we've had this discussion on the show here about propaganda, right? We have to deal in propaganda. The white man has dealt propaganda. He didn't give a shit if we figured it out that it was fake, if it, you know, he didn't care. But he knows that the propaganda that he's put out hundreds of years ago will last for hundreds of years from now. Why do y'all think a methed out motherfucker in Montana, in a trailer park in Detroit or some shit, or trailer park in the South, why do you think that they think that they're better than any one of us who are on this live stream right now? It's because of propaganda. We have to create our own propaganda, right? And I hope you guys are understanding what I'm saying without me fully saying it. We have to create our own propaganda, positive propaganda that builds up the self-esteem of our own people. In the chat room, Revolutionary Matron is here. Good to see you again, Revolutionary Matron. Revolutionary Matron was a part of a great discussion that we had on the Discord after the Saturday Shoot the Breeze that just passed. I expect, based on what I've heard from Revolutionary Matron, we're going to hear some good things coming from her in the near future. KW7 says the Moors who went into Spain were not solely African, right? They were Berbers, correct, right? Who were the principal. The African Moors were mercenaries and the worker class. Revolutionary Matron says the Moors used to rule Spain. In Africa, they just made the way for their cousins to come in. Kevin Care 42 says greetings to Revolutionary Matron. Kevin Care 42, was it you that posted the documentary on the Discord about the meth in Montana? Was that you or was that Derico Cooper? You know, you guys who are on the Discord, go to I think it's Off Topic. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of information on the Discord, but go check that out. All right, go check that out. All right. Again, let's get those likes up, please. Let's get the likes to equal at least the number of people who are live with us today. Right now, the likes are only at half of the number of people who are here. So to continue, before the breaking up of the social structure of the Western African states such as Ghana and Songhai, and the internal strife that made the slave trade possible, many Africans, especially West Africans, lived in a society in which university life was fairly common. Scholars were held in reverence. In that period of Western African history, the University of Sankore at Timbuktu was flourishing, and its great chancellor, the last of the monumental scholars of West Africa, Ahmed Baba, reigned over the university. A great African scholar, he wrote 47 books, each on a separate subject. He received all of his education within Africa. In fact, he did not leave the Western Sudan until he was exiled to Morocco during the invasion of 1594. My point is this. There existed in Africa prior to the beginning of the slave trade a cultural way of life that in many ways was equal, if not superior, to many of the cultures then existing in Europe. The slave trade destroyed these cultures and created a dilemma that the African has not been able to extract himself from to this day. There were, in the Africans' past, rulers who extended kingdoms into empires, great armies that subdued entire nations, generals who advanced the technique of military science, scholars with wisdom and foresight, and priests who told of gods that were kind and strong. But with the bringing of the African to the New World, every effort was made to destroy his memory of having ever been part of a free and intelligent people. The greatest destroyer of African culture, the greatest exploiter of the African, was the plantation system of the New World. The African was transformed into something called a Negro. He was demeaned. This is the thing that is uniquely tragic about the African slave system. Of all the slave systems, of all the slave systems in the world, no other dehumanized a slave more than that started by the Europeans in the 15th century. I had a Cuban guy once complain to me, once tell me that there were other instances of chattel slavery. And I said, prove it. And I think he said the Spartans were not chattel slaves on the level that Africans were. You'll hear white folks bring up the Irish. The Irish were not chattel slaves like Africans. Using the church as a rationale, they began to set up myths that nearly always read the African out of human history. beginning with the classification of the African as a lesser being. The Catholic Church's justification for slavery was that the African was being brought under the guidance of Christendom, and that he would eventually receive his blessings. You know, in that, you know, it's funny how folks cling to stuff, but in that debate, and I posted it on the Discord on the Conscious videos, I believe. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did. That recent debate on the Abrahamic, or discussion on the Abrahamic religions, I guess the host, African Esquire, I think it was African, is it yeah, I think it's African Esquire, was the host, and she tried to give this little loophole. Oh, you know, someone mentioned the Pope. Let's just be honest, that's demonic and blah, blah, blah. Lady, that's Christianity. That's Amore. That's Christianity. You can't separate the two. If that's evil, then Christianity is evil and demonic. KW7 says Urugu is running on delusions of grandeur. They believe their own press, which is why they are set against teaching critical race theory in their schools. But you see, KW7 is making a great point, and that adds to the point that I was making earlier. That adds to the point I was making earlier, that critical race theory would go against the propaganda. They need every white person to feel superior to every non-white person. KW7 goes on to say the objective of Urugu is to freeze the world as they stole it. The African hasn't come to terms with this fact. Absolutely. Revolutionary Matron says waiting for the afterlife is unique to the African. Everyone else gets their reward here. Everyone else lives heaven here. But I gotta live hell here? How is it I'm living hell here and other people are living heaven here? Fundamentally, by now, we're supposed to all know that this is it. And the idea that we allow this group of people to have us living in this miserable state is mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. Even this bullshit of like working 5 or 6 days out of a week is mind-blowing to see how many different peoples go along with that bullshit. It's mind-blowing. The rationale was that slavery was a blessing to the African. It was not. And a lot of you Abrahamic religion folks, you especially Christian folks, y'all believe that bullshit. And it briefly came up in the debate. There's a lot of y'all who believe, man, if it had not been for slavery, I wouldn't know Jesus. I still don't know who he is. And I live the same existence that y'all live. Y'all ain't living no better existence than anyone else with that belief. But I digress. There were several competing slave systems in the New World. In order to understand the effects of these various systems on the personality of the Africans, we have to look at each one individually. In Cuba and Haiti, the Africans were often a majority in the population. This is also true of certain portions of Brazil. Therefore, the system operated differently in these areas. And although it was still slavery, the African had some cultural mobility. If you go back, you've heard me talk about this when you talk about the difference of the continental African, the difference of the Caribbean African, and the difference of the UK and the African of the Americas. Right? There's a difference between us. It doesn't make us unrelated. In fact, it makes us related, but we're just a little bit different. And it's because of the conditions that we had. In South America and in the West Indies, the slave masters did not outlaw the African drum, African ornamentations, African religion, or other things dear to the African, remembered from his former way of life. This permitted a form of cultural continuity among the slaves in the West Indies, Cuba, South America, that did not exist in the United States. In the Portuguese area in the West Indies, and often in South America, the plantation owner would buy a shipload or half a shipload of slaves. These slaves usually came from the same areas in Africa, and they naturally spoke the same language and had the same basic culture. Families in the main were kept together. If a slave on an island was sold to a plantation owner at the other end of the island, he could still walk to see his relatives. This made for a form of cultural continuity among the slaves in South America, Cuba, Haiti, that later made their revolts more successful than revolts in the United States. And to be clear, that doesn't make anyone better than anyone else. It's just what it is. KW-7 says it's our responsibility to teach our own children our own version of critical race theory. Absolutely. Absolutely. In the United States, in the fight to destroy every element of the culture of the slaves, the system was cruel. No other system did so much to demean the personality of the slave, to deny his personality, or to ruthlessly sell family members away from each other. Now, in modern times, you'll get some pushback against this statement somewhat. Some scholars believe that actually, that because the system of slavery was so bad in the Caribbean, it made the enslaved adhere and embrace their traditional African way a little closer. That's why you'll see from the Caribbean, there's more practitioners of traditional African spiritual systems than you would see in, say, North America, right? There's way more of that going on there. So that's something that can be, this last statement can be a little bit debated, right? The American slave system operated almost like the American brokerage system. If a person bought 20 slaves at the beginning of the week, found himself short of cash at the end of the week, he might, if the price was right, sell 10. These 10 might be resold within a few days. The family, the most meaningful entity in African life, was systematically and deliberately destroyed. Now that's true for sure in America. That isn't as true in the Caribbean. But in South America, the slave managed to stay in his group and therefore preserve some of his cultural continuity. In spite of these drastic drawbacks, the African in the Americas, including the United States, made a meaningful contribution to the preservation of the countries in which he was a slave. Another neglected aspect of the African in the New World is the role of the African woman. Comparatively, few white women were brought into the New World during the first 100 years. That's how much these folks hate their women, by the way. Right? Many families of the New World originated from cohabitation between the white slave master and the African woman. Later, the same slave master, especially in the United States, made and supported laws forbidding his own child to have an education or sit beside him on public transportation. In Haiti, the African woman sometimes had a kind of semi-legal status. South America, especially in Brazil, sometimes the white slave master married the African woman and she became a free person. these free these free African women in South America began to maneuver their husbands in an attempt to lessen the harshness of the slave system. In the United States, however, there could be no such maneuver. Why do you guys think the rules were different? Same white boy, right? Well, not quite the same, but in general, right? It was this white boy in all these locations. Why the difference? Why the difference? You guys post that. I'll read it live on air. Haiti and Cuba, during the early period, were dominated by their mother countries. Wars were started within these countries to liberate them from the European masters. Africans made a meaningful contribution toward the early liberation of Cuba, Haiti, and other areas of South America. They fought with Simon Bolivar for the freedom of South America, and fought valiantly to free Haiti from the domination of the French. In the United States, especially in the American Revolution, the African slave often took the place of a white person who decided that he did not want to fight and fought with the promise that he would gest freedom afterward or get freedom afterwards. There's a typo there. Thousands of Africans fought in the American Revolution with this promise. And a little known incident in our history is that thousands of Africans fought with the British when the British made the same promise and the African believed them. Apparently it depended on who got to him first. And that's something people don't talk about. You'll hear Tariq Nasheed and them talk about black Americans never waged a war against the country. Clearly, there were blacks who fought on the side of the British. You gotta be careful where you get your information from. The African was a major contributor in the making of the New World. The economy of the New World rested largely on slave labor. Absolutely. For many years, 1/3 of the trade of the New World was with the small island of Santo Domingo, which later became Haiti. Haiti and the other Caribbean islands also influenced the economic system of Europe. Slavery and the slave trade was the first international investment in capital. It was the first large-scale investment that was intercontinental. Many Europeans invested in ships and in the goods and services taken from these African countries and became independently wealthy, right? But the slave revolts continued. By the end of the 17th century, the picture of slavery began to change drastically. Economic necessity, not racial prejudice, originally directed the African slave trade to the New World. As early as 1663, a group of slaves joined a group of white indentured servants in a revolt. Some slaves took the Christian version of the Bible literally and believed that God meant them to be free men. Slaves such as Gabriel Prosser in Virginia, who led a revolt of 40,000 slaves in 1800. In 1822, in Charleston, South Carolina, Carpenter Denmark Vesey planned one of the most extensive slave revolts on record, but he was betrayed and put to death with many of his followers. In 1831, Nat Turner led the greatest slave revolt ever to occur in Virginia. The slaves never accepted their condition passively. In his book, American Negro Slave Revolts, Dr. Herbert Aptheker records 250 such revolts. The African slave in the Americas, in addition to assisting in the freedom and the economy of these countries, made a major contribution to his own freedom. Right? I like that last point. Don't just think black folks were sitting up here in America, in the Caribbean, and just twiddling their thumbs and being enslaved. Nah, folks had some spirit. We have to have that spirit now too. And I'm sure a lot of our ancestors, a lot of our Caribbean and American ancestors, I'm sure they thought there was no way out of it too. I'm sure a lot of them thought there's We're boxed in. These guys have gained too much ground on us. And they still planned, they strategized, they organized, and they fought. Some more successful than others. This is why we can't give up today. Yeah, they have a lot of ground on us. Yeah, they have us boxing. Yes, every day they're planning some way to box us in even further, but we cannot give up. In the story of the rise and fall of great African states, and subsequently the slave trade, we are trying to deal with something much bigger than history itself. We're trying to deal with an old situation and a new situation and trying to address ourselves to the current cry for black history and black power. Our major point is this: the African people who became slaves in the United States have been many things in history, good and bad. They have ruled great nations and they have destroyed great nations. They're profoundly human, and they have played every role in the human drama, from saint to buffoon. Slavery does not represent the sum total of our history. Further, in order to understand the African in the New World, it is necessary to look honestly at the African. It is even more necessary that we look honestly at the interpretations of the role that the Africans have played in shaping the destiny of this hemisphere. There's been a lot of romance and pure nonsense coming from a lot of interpreters who have been long ago academically accepted. It is high time that serious questions be asked about their interpretations and the concept of the mild slave system, especially in Brazil. For instance, Frank Tannenbaum interprets Gilberto Freyre as meaning, quote, the settling of the Western Hemisphere by peoples coming from Europe and Africa was an adventure on a grand scale involving diverse people, varying cultures, millions of human beings, and hundreds of years. The common element was the New World. Its physical features and cultural types were strangely dissimilar, but the student discerns many and analogous design patterned by the newcomers as they establish themselves in the strange and unexplored regions. It is natural, therefore, for Gilberto Freyre, or Freire maybe, to draw revealing similarities between the history of Brazil and the United States, end of quote. Then Tannenbaum goes on to say, quote, like everything that he writes, this volume has a freshness and a lucidity that endow the reader with insight and understanding of the complex instrumentalities for life and labor contributed by man in this new world. Freire finds in the development of Brazil, for example, the impact of the frontier and the domination of the plantation, so typical of our own South. The disparity implied rather than expressed in the study is the divergent position of the Negro within the two areas. For the Negro, and especially the mulatto, had an access to the culture of Brazil and a role in social life unknown in the United States. In politics and the arts and society, the mulatto found the door ajar, even if not fully open, and a markedly different social milieu has come into being. So here's my question about this, and I notice Clarke tends to harp on this a lot. Are you saying the mulatto in the United States didn't have some upward mobility for being mulatto? Yes, there was laws against, rules against him riding the bus, riding public transportation with his rapist, with his or her rapist father, right, and whatnot. But are you saying, is it the understanding of us here today that mulattoes had no upward mobility similar to what's found in South America or maybe in parts of the Caribbean? To continue, even under the empire, the Negro and the mulatto, and socially the attractive mulatto women, found an acceptance unthinkable in the North American scene. Freire quotes from Eubank this revealing picture, quote, I have passed black ladies in silks and jewelry with male slaves in livery behind them. Today, one rode past in her carriage, accompanied by a liveried footman and a coachman. Several have white husbands. This first doctor of the city is a colored man. So is the president of the province. End of quote. The young Afro-Caribbean scholar Tony Martin, in his article, quote, "The Black Man in Brazil, a Challenge to the Honest Historian," end of quote, calls for a whole new approach to the history of Africans in the New World, especially in Brazil. He opens his article by saying, quote, "A lot of rewriting of Black history will have to be done over the next few years if a true picture of the Black man's experience in the New World is ever to emerge. One of the areas where most violence has been done to the available evidence is Brazil, where a host of travelers and historians, many of them highly esteemed members of their professions, have over the years woven a web of nonsensical mystification around the concept of the quote-unquote mild treatment of slaves in Brazil, as opposed to the quote-unquote harsh treatment meted out to the unfortunate Black persons who happen to find themselves in the West Indies or North America. The favorable experience of the Black man in Brazil, or the quote-unquote favorable experience of the Black man in Brazil, has been extended by these pundits to an alleged absence of racial discrimination in contemporary Brazil, which is conveniently contrasted with the situation in racist North America. Quote, to account for these, quote-unquote differences, explanations have been sought in the alleged ameliorating influences of the Catholic Church, the Portuguese propensity for violating the virginity of Black women, the residue of Black blood coursing through Portuguese veins, wow, relics of the Moorish conquest, and the different species of African who found his way to Brazil, end of quote. How many of you have encountered a Portuguese person? Just out of curiosity. I don't think I've ever encountered a Portuguese person. How many of you have encountered a Portuguese person? To continue. The determining factor in the economic and cultural survival of the New World was the African. His labor developed the plantation system, which laid the basis for the economic system, which we call capitalism. The African is again standing at the door of the New World. This time, he's not asking acceptance or integration. He's insisting and demanding that he be a participant in bringing a new social order into being. The reaction to this demand will determine the future of this hemisphere and influence the destiny of all mankind. Right? John Henrik CLARKE. That is the paper for today, the impact of the African on the New World, a reappraisal. What did you guys think of that paper? You guys who are live with me today, what did you guys think of that paper? I'll take a station ID break here. I'll come up on the other side. I'll read your remaining comments and we'll call that an episode.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure you guys follow KWAZ Radio. Make sure you guys follow the YouTube channel for KWAZ Radio. Make sure you guys also check out the Queen's Council podcast. Right? But follow KWAZ Radio. And by the way, follow me and all the guys on social media. You can find us on Twitter especially. I'm on Facebook. KWAZ Radio is on Facebook. So by all means, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. All right. In the chat room, KW Don 7 says there's a sizable Portuguese population up here, and up here he means Canada. Is that right? Is that right? I can't think of ever meeting a Portuguese person in my entire life. So that's interesting that you've met them. What's their phenotype? What do they look like? Is there any sign of African blood coursing through their veins? When you look at that group of people in your neck of the woods, is there any little bit, of a phenotype that suggests African blood is coursing through their veins? By the way, usually Dorico Cooper Photography is here, and oftentimes I'll ask him to give a stock tip, but in honor of him and him not being here, I just want to point out that Bitcoin, if you're keeping up with these cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin is down another 5.4% in the last 24 hours. And so now it's down to like 42,000 and change. To use Dorico Cooper Photography's usual advice, buy the dip. It's on sale. At one point, not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, it was like at 65,000 a coin. Now you have the ability to purchase more, seeing that it's on sale. It's on a discount right now. Purchase some more. Don't forget to look at everything else. Don't forget to look at everything else in that crypto space. Another thing I'll say personally too, don't be shy of penny stocks. I know that historically penny stocks have had a bad name, but if you do your research, I know Kevin Care42 put me on to HCMC. I mean, that's a penny stock that for almost nothing, you could have a couple thousand pieces of that, and all it needs to do is get to, because right now it's decimals of a penny. All it needs to do is get to a penny. All it needs to do is get to, if you buy it now, all it needs to do is get to a penny or a few cents, and you could have you could have, a nice piece of dough for the little investment that you put in. Revolutionary Matron says, have you heard the rumors that they killed the dark Portuguese people? No, I've never heard that. I've never heard that. KW97 says some are swarthy, but most look typically white. All right. I mean, but isn't that true of people in Spain as well? Some are swarthy, but most look typically white, right? But I've never heard that before. They killed the dark Portuguese people. Wow. Okay. Anyway, that's been the episode tonight. Again, if you don't mind, I see we have twice as many viewers as likes. If you don't mind, grab the like button. If you're new here, like Tiffany Johnson was, or seemingly was, by all means, hit the subscribe button and click the bell to be notified when I'm on again. By now, I think most of you know I'm on every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Saturday is where you give me the topics and we talk about it. It's a conversation between me and the chat room. And there's also the option for folks to jump on the voice channel in the Discord as well. To be heard live on air when I do a YouTube live stream. I want to thank you guys for being here. Let me shout everyone out. KW Don 7 was here. Revolutionary Matron was here. Kevin Care42 was here. Who else was here? Black Excellence was here in the room. NYC Sports Archives was here. NYC Beauties was here. That's who was here tonight. Tiffany Johnson was here. And again, I appreciate you all for tuning in tonight. All right. Look up at the top. There's a pinned comment from me. Join the Discord. On the Discord, for those who don't know, the idea is that we work on an African-centered, a Pan-African-centered curriculum. In addition to that, we have other things coming down the pipe with creatives and writing scripts and stories, again, positive propaganda type stuff to uplift our people, right? That sounds good to you, join. If you're just a fan of the show and you want to be around, on the Discord where the show is, join the Discord and, just say, hey, I'm a fan of the show. I'd like to hang around and see what's up. That's fine by me. Anyway, guys, until next time, this has been the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.